ladies and gentlemen, students and scholars, teachers and trainers, professors and professionals, listeners and learners, those who belong to the field of science, commerce, arts and engineering. The most honorable present Prime Minister Narendra Modi ji, newly elected 14th Vice President Shri Jagdeep Dhankar ji, 15th elected President of India Shrimati Draupadi Murmu ji, respected ministers and doctors, honorable advocates, advertisers, administrators, reverend fathers and mothers, affectionate sons and daughters, I, Dr. Rakesh from USA, heartily, cordially welcome all of you. It is really nice time, nice place, nice section, listening with 100% presence and so of mind. You are listening the truth of science and spirituality, from language to literature. Augustan writers, our students and scholars, learners, those who are preparing themselves for appearing in NET examination, other language scholars, soft skill trainers, students, those who are going to appear in IELTS classes, and especially literature and grammar classes. You must know the fundamentals of English, how English has come in form. Now we will go through Augustan writers. With Johnson, who succeeded Dryden and Pope in the chief place of English letters, the classic movement had largely spent its force, and the later half of the 18th century gives us an imposing array of writers who differ so widely that it is almost impossible to classify them. In general, three schools of writers are noticeable. First, the classicists, who under Johnson's lead insisted upon elegance and regularity of style. Second, the romantic poets like Collins, Gray, Thomson and Burns, who revolted from Pope's artificial couplets and wrote of nature and the human heart. Third, the early novelists like Defoe and romantic poets like Defoe and Fielding, who introduced a new type of literature. The romantic poets and the novelists are reserved for special chapters and of the other writers. Berkeley and Hume in philosophy, Robertson, Hume and Gibbon in history, Chesterfield and Lady Montague in letter writing, Adam Smith in economics, Pittsburgh, Fox and a score of lesser writers in politics. We select only two, Burke and Gibbon, whose works are most typical of the Augustan, that is the elegant classic style of prose writing. Edmund Burke from 1729 to 1797. To read all of Burke's collected works and so to understand him thoroughly is something of a task. You are equal to it. On the other hand, to read selections here and there, as most of us do, is to get a wrong idea of the man and to join either in fulsome praise of his brilliant oratory or in honest confession that his periods are ponderous and his ideas often buried under Johnson's verbiage. Such are the contrasts to be found on successive pages of Burke's 12 volumes, which cover the enormous range of the political and economic thought of the age, and which mingle fact and fancy, philosophy, statistics, and brilliant flights of the imagination to a degree never before seen in English literature. For Burke belongs in spirit to the new romantic school, while in style he is a model for the formal classicists. We can only glance at the life of this marvelous Irishman and then consider his place in our literature. Dear friends, what are the works of Edmund Burke? There are three distinctly marked periods in the Burke's career, and these correspond closely to the years in which he was busied with the affairs of America, India, and France successively. The first period was one of prophecy. He had studied the history and temper of the American colonies, and he warned England of the disaster which must follow her persistence in ignoring the American demands and especially the American spirit. His great speeches on American taxation and on conciliation with America were delivered in 1774 and 1775, preceding the Declaration of Independence. In this period, Burke's labor seemed all in vain. He lost his cause, and England, her greatest colony. The second period is one of denunciation rather than of prophecy. England had won India, but when Burke studied the methods of her victory and understood the Sully's ways in which millions of poor natives were made to serve the interest of an English monopoly, his soul rose in revolt And again he was the champion of an oppressed people. His two greatest speeches of this period are the Nabote of Arcot's deaths, the Nabote of Arcot's deaths, and his tremendous impeachment of Warren Hastings. Again he apparently lost his cause, though he was still fighting on the side of right. Hastings was acquitted and the spoliation of India went on. But the seeds of reform were sown and grew and bore fruit long after Burke's labors were ended. The third period is, curiously enough, one of reaction, whether because the horrors of the French Revolution had frightened him with the danger of popular liberty, or because his own advance in office and power had made him side unconsciously with the upper classes, is unknown. That he was as sincere and noble now as in all his previous life is not questioned. He broke with the liberal Whigs and joined forces with the reactionary Tories. He opposed the romantic writers who were on fire with enthusiasm over the French Revolution and thundered against the dangers which the revolutionary spirit must breed, forgetting that it was the revolution which had made modern English possible, which had made modern England possible. Here, where we must judge him to have been mistaken in his cause. He succeeded for the first time. It was due largely to Burke's influence that the growing sympathy for the French people was checked in England and war was declared, which ended in the frightful victories of Trafalgar and Waterloo. Burke's best known work of this period is his Reflections on the French Revolution, which he polished and revised again and again before it was finally printed. This ambitious literary essay, though it met with remarkable success, is a disappointment to the reader. Though of Celtic blood, Burke did not understand the French or the principles for which the common people were fighting in their own way, and his denunciations and apostrophes to France suggest a preacher without humor, hammering away at sinners who are not present in his congregation. The essay has few illuminating ideas, but a great deal of Johnsonian rhetoric which make its periods tiresome. Notwithstanding our admiration for the brilliancy of its author, more significant is one of the Burke's first essays, a philosophical inquiry into the origin of our ideas of the sublime and beautiful, which is sometimes read in order to show the contrast in style with Addison's spectator essays on the pleasures of imagination. Burke's best known speeches on conciliation with America, taxation, and the impeachment of Warren Hastings are still much studied in our schools as models of English prose. And this fact tends to give them an exaggerated literary importance. Viewed purely as literature, they have words enough, and the first of these, so characteristic of the classic age, is that they abound in fine rhetoric but lack simplicity. In a strict sense, these eloquent speeches are not literature to delight the reader and to suggest ideas, but studies in rhetoric and in mental concentration. All this, however, is on the surface. A careful story of many of these three famous speeches reveals certain admirable qualities which account for the important place they are given in the study of English. First, as showing the stateliness and the rhetoric power of our language, these speeches are almost unrivaled. Second, though Burke speaks in prose, he is essentially a poet whose imagery, like that of Milton's prose works, is more remarkable than that of many of our writers of verse. He speaks in figures, images, symbols, and the musical cadence of his sensations, of his sentences, reflects the influence of his wide reading of poetry, not only in figurative expressions, not only in figurative expression, but much more in spirit. He belongs with the poets of the revival. At times his language is pseudo-classic, reflecting the influence of Johnson and his school, but his thought is always romantic. He is governed by ideal rather than by practical interest. A profound sympathy for humanity is perhaps his most marked characteristic. Third, the supreme object of these orations, so different from the majority of political speeches, is not to win approval or to gain votes, but to establish the truth. Like our own Lincoln, Burke had a superb faith in the compelling power of the truth, a faith in man also, who in the history of our race means anything, will not willingly follow a lie. The methods of these two great leaders are strikingly similar in the respect that each repeat his idea in many ways, presenting the truth from different viewpoints, so that it will appeal to men of widely different experiences. Otherwise, the two men are in marked contrast. The uneducated Lincoln speaks in simple, homely words, draws his illustrations from the farm, and often adds a humorous story, so apt and telling that his hearers can never forget the point of his argument. The scholarly Burke speaks in ornate, majestic periods and searches all history and all literature for his illustrations. His wealth of imagery and allusion, together with his rare combination of poetic and logical reasoning, make these orations remarkable, entirely apart from their subject and purpose. Fourth, Burke takes his stand squarely upon the principle of justice. He has studied history, and he finds that to establish justice between man and man, between nation and nation, has been the supreme object of every reformer since the world began. No small or merely temporary success attracts him. Only the truth will suffice for an argument, and nothing less than justice will ever settle a question permanently. Such is his platform. Simple as the golden rule, unshakable as the moral law, Hence, though he apparently fails of his immediate desire in each of these three orations, the principle for which he contends cannot fail. As a modern writer says, Lincoln, as a modern writer says of Lincoln, the full rich flood of his life, the full rich flood of his life through the nation's pulse is yet beating, and his words are still potent in shaping the course of English politics in the way of justice. Next is Edward Gibbon, 1737 to 1794. To understand Burke or Johnson, one must read a multitude of books and be wary in his judgment. But with Gibbon, the task is comparatively easy, for one has only to consider two books, his memoirs and the vast volume of his history, to understand the author. In his memoirs, we have an interesting reflection of Gibbon's own personality, a man who looks with satisfaction on the material side of things, who seeks always the easiest path for himself and avoids life's difficulties and responsibilities. I sighed as a lover, but I obeyed as a son, he says, when to save his inheritance. He gave up the woman he loved and came home to enjoy the paternal loaves and wishes. That is suggestive of the man's whole life. His history, on the other hand, is a remarkable work. It was the first in our language to be written on scientific principles and with a solid basis of fact, and the style is the very climax of that classicism which had ruled England for an entire century. Its combination of historical fact and literary style makes the decline and fall of the Roman Empire the one thing of Gibbon's life that is worthy to be remembered. Dear friends, your presence is praiseworthy and admirable. Now we are reading the revival of the Romantic poetry. The old order changeth, yielding place to new, and God fulfilled himself in many ways, lest one good custom should corrupt the word. Tennyson's The Passing of Author. The meaning of Romanticism. While Dryden, Pope and Johnson were successively the dictators of English letters, and while under their leadership the heroic couplet became the fashion of poetry, and literature in general became satiric, and critical in spirit, and formal in expression, a new romantic movement quietly made its appearance. Thomson's The Seasons, 1730, was the first noteworthy poem for the Romantic revival, and the poems and the poets increased steadily in the number and importance till in the age of Wordsworth and Scott. The spirit of Romanticism dominated our literature more completely than Classicism had ever done. This romantic movement, which Victor Hugo calls liberalism in literature, it's simply the expression of life as seen by imagination rather than by prosaic common sense, which was the central doctrine of English philosophy in the 18th century. It had 6 prominent characteristics which distinguish it from the so-called classic literature which we have just studied. 1. The Romantic movement was marked and is always marked by a strong reaction and protest against the bondage of the rule and custom, which in science and technology, theology, as well as in literature, generally tend to fetter the free human spirit. Next, number 2 is Romanticism return to nature and to plain humanity for its material, and so is in marked contrast to Classicism, which had confined its largely to the clubs and drawing rooms and to the social and political life of London, forms and seasons. Whatever its defects was a revelation of the natural wealth and beauty, which for nearly a century had been hardly noticed by the great writers of England. 3 is, it brought again the dream of a golden age in which the stern realities of life were forgotten and the ideals of youth were established as only permanent realities. 4. The dreamer lives forever, but the toiler dies in a day, expresses perhaps only the wild fancy of modern poet. But when we think of it seriously, the dreams and ideals of a people are cherished possessions long after their stone moments have crumbled away and their battles are forgotten. The Romantic movement emphasized these eternal ideals of youth and appealed to the human heart as the classic elegance of Dryden and Pope could never do. Next, number 4 is Romanticism was marked by intense human sympathy and by a consequent understanding of the human heart. Not to intellect or to science has the heart unblocked its treasures, but rather to the touch of a sympathetic nature, and things that are hidden from the wise and prudent are revealed unto children. Pope had no appreciable humility. Swift's work is a frightful satire. Swift's work is a frightful satire. Addition delighted polite society, but had no message for plain people. While even Johnson, with all his kindness, had no feeling for man in the mass, but supported Sir Robert Walpole in his policy of letting evils alone until forced by revolution to take notice of humanity's appeal. With the Romantic revival, all this was changed. While Howard was working, historically for prison reform and Wilberforce for the liberation of the slaves, Gray wrote his short and simple Annals of the Poor, and Goldsmith's Deserted Village, and Cowper sang, "My ear is pained, my soul is sick with every day's report of wrong and outrage with which earth is filled. There is no flesh in man's obdurate heart, it does not feel for man." This sympathy for the poor and this cry against oppression grew stronger and stronger till it culminated in Bobby Burns, who more than any other writers in any language is the poet of the unlettered human heart. Next is number 5. The Romantic movement was the expression of individual genius rather than of established rules. In consequence, the literature of the revival is as varied as the characters and moods of the different writers. When we read Pope, for instance, we have a general impression of sameness as if all his polished poems were made in the same machine. But in the work of the best romanticists, there is endless variety. To read them is like passing through a new village, meeting a score of different human types and finding in each one something to love or to remember. Nature and the heart of man are as new as if we had never studied them. Hence, in reading the romanticists who went to these sources for their material, we are seldom wearied but often surprised. And the surprise is like that of the sunrise or the sea, which always offers some new beauty and stirs us deeply, as if we had never seen it before. Next, number 6 is the romantic movement, while it followed its own genius, was not altogether unguided. Strictly speaking, there is no new movement either in history or in literature. Each grows out of some good thing which has proceeded and looks back with reverence to past masters. Spencer, Shakespeare, and Milton were the inspiration of the romantic revival, and we can hardly read a poem of the early romanticists without finding a suggestion of the influence of one of these great leaders. There are various other characteristics of romanticism, but these 6, the protest against the bondage of rules, the return to nature and the human heart, the interest in old sagas and medieval romances as suggestive of a heroic age, the sympathy for the toilers of the world, and the emphasis upon individual genius, and the return to Milton and the Elizabethan, instead of to Pope and Dryden, for literary models are the most noticeable and the most interesting. Remembering them, we shall better appreciate the work of the following writers who, in varying degree, illustrate the revival of romantic poetry in the 18th century. Thanks, dear literary friends, those who are specially preparing themselves for the preparation of literature, language and grammar, for appearing in the NET examination. Dear friends, these are the fundamentals that you have heard and listened carefully. May God bless all of us. Thanks all of you. Nice to see all of you. Dhanyavad.